Editing an interview, whether that's for a news package, a magazine feature, maybe a documentary, is such a fun, creative process because you get to carefully craft your story around what your central character is saying. Indeed, when we're working with interviews, it's in the edit that we develop the direction of our videos, as conversations captured on screen convey the raw human emotion that drives great storytelling. But how do we get started with editing an interview, making sure we don't get overwhelmed in the process? Well, there are many ways to edit them, of course, but if you're just starting out or finding yourself in a bit of a fluster with them, I'm here to share my tried and tested methods with you. So let's get started. So here we are in a new LumaFusion project, and I'm going to find my interview of, in this example, LumaTouch's Scott Squire, and I'm going to bring him down into the LumaFusion timeline. For me personally, I always like to edit my interviews first before anything else, because more often than not, I use them to guide my storytelling, forming the foundation of my video in which I'll weave things like my voiceover, B-roll and music around. So I'm going to color code the clip here so that when I do have lots of other content on the timeline later, I can really quickly see from a glance that it's an interview as opposed to B-roll or an image or anything else. From here, my next task is to pull out and delete all the unusable parts of the interview. So without listening to it back, I'll simply trim off the beginning section that I don't need, looking up to the preview here to help me. And then I skim through the footage, splitting the clip after Scott has finished talking and before he talks again, deleting the middle section. Now, I know the part where he's not talking isn't usable because that's me asking the question. I wasn't mic'd, I never intended for my voice to be included, but if in your interviews you are mic'd, you want your voice to be heard or your interviewer's voice to be heard in the final video, you might want to keep those sections in. So I just keep going through my interview a section at a time, keeping all of Scott's answers to my questions on the timeline, along with any other comments he made that might be usable in my final piece. Even if he breaks halfway through a sentence or starts again, I still keep it at this moment, just in case it's a valuable piece of content to me later on. Now you might be thinking, well, Caroline, why don't you just use the preview to pre-trim your clips before adding them to the timeline? Which of course I could do, but in my experience, I found if you have a long interview clip with many separate sections to pull out, this can be a bit more fiddly when you're skimming quickly through your content, doing a rough edit like I am now, trying to find the right frame in the preview, especially if you're on a smartphone like me. However, if you're in insert mode down here on the timeline, the magnetic effect where all your content's going to stick together helps you whiz through your content for this task, pulling out all the bits you don't want in less than really 2 minutes. This is a quick task just to get your timeline filled with video you can actually use and might make to the final cut of your video. The next thing I do is watch the video back, one clip at a time. I'm actually going to play it through and then I'm going to add a piece of overlay text detailing very briefly what that section is about. By doing this, I'll be able to see at a glance what Scott is talking about and when, simply by scrubbing over the timeline without actually having to watch the clips back 100 times, and it will help me when it comes to develop my story, choosing the best bits and writing my voiceover. I usually like to place the outtakes or one-off sentences or shots where there's a lovely moment at the end of the block of clips here, so I can choose to use them if I wish later, but they're not with the main answers of the interview that I'll be focusing on. Once I've done that, it's time to check the frame and fit, audio, stabilization and effects by heading to the editors by double tapping on that first clip. Different producers prefer different framing depending on the style they're going for and where it's going to be published. But for this video, I like a traditional framing with my interviewee Scott here, third of the way into the frame, ensuring we've got this looking room, space above his head so the shot's not too cramped, and space below his shoulders here to comfortably fit an Aston bar on in the future. Next, I'll go into the audio editor, checking the levels, making sure the audio never goes into the red here. Also, this is a great time to add any filters or effects into your clip, like the new sound isolation filter, for example, that will help you cut out background noise from the clip. After I've done that, it's time to add stabilization if the clip needs it, say for handheld interviews that could be a bit smoother. And then finally to the color and effects tab and make any color correction changes that might be needed. Or of course, adding any effects like, for example, sharpening a shot or using the chroma key if using a green screen, for example. So once I've done this, I'm going to head back to the main timeline and remember to copy the effects from the clip I've just been working on to all the other clips in that interview. So to do this, I'm going to select the clip, tap the copy paste clipboard icon and tap copy. Next, I use the multi-select tool to highlight all the other clips and tap the clipboard icon to paste those changes to the other clips, making sure the elements that I want to copy across are highlighted here. Now everything will look and sound just the way I want it, regardless of where it's placed within the video project later on. So that's how I would go through an interview step by step every single time I edit. Now you might have your own methods too, but by trying out these techniques and going through the process a few times, you can pick and choose your favorite parts to get into a workflow that you love and works for you as an editor. In this particular video I was working on, I repeated this process with all the members of the LumaTouch team in Seattle that I interviewed. I was actually montaging these interviews together to form a video about our work behind the scenes at LumaTouch. And you can see it's all nice and organized on one timeline that I can scrub through easily, seeing what each person has said. This was about their work and passion for editing, and as you can imagine, there were so many different talking points that arose in the interviews that if I hadn't put this overlay text on or had a different colour for each interviewee, it would have been quite overwhelming for me to form the story arc of the video and experiment with the order of the clips without constantly watching everything back and seeing which clip was of what team member and what they were talking about. So once you have your interview or multiple interviews on your timeline, the fun can begin, as you'll now take time to craft your story. Depending on what you're creating, whether it's a news package, a feature piece, a documentary, or anything else, from here my advice is to lay out the foundations of your timeline, ordering your clips in a way that's engaging for audiences to watch from start to finish. You can add your B-roll, titles, and music once you've got the body of your timeline created. If you're writing a voiceover, say for a news package or a commercial, a good tip is to write your script around the golden nuggets of content you've got from your interviewees, rather than slotting your clips into your pre-made script. That way, your characters tell the story, rather than just forcing their words into a pre-made narrative. So those are my top tips for editing an interview on the timeline. If you guys have any techniques that you'd like to share with us, please do put them in the comments. We'd love to read them and learn from you. For more content from the LumaTouch Academy, I'll be right here next week.